Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear participants. Welcome to this session of Meezan lecture series. You would recall that we have started this series to study the treatise written by Ustaz Javed Ahmed Ghamidi regarding the contents of Islam as he has understood them. Its Urdu name is Meezan. Its English translation exists by the name of Islam, a comprehensive introduction. So we have been studying certain chapters in the past, and today we'll look at the chapter which is called the Political Shariah. The order in which we are studying this book is not the same in which it has been written. I'm selecting various chapters first so that you are able to gauge some of the important points, and the chapters selected themselves are also briefer than the rest to acclimatize you to the approach as well. So the word political Shariah, of course, relates to the directives of religion and the Sharia directives of religion regarding the arena of politics and political science. You can say religion has guided us in various affairs, in various collective affairs. Amongst these affairs is the sphere of politics, and it has given us principles, and it is these principles that we call the Sharia. They are based on these regulations. So, in order to understand the background, we have to also gauge the fact that human beings by their nature are social beings, and a social setup is an essential requirement of the nature on which God has created them. And to protect this social setup from the misuse of the God-given free will to human beings, soon or late, they are forced to protect the created social system by organizing it as a collective system. So in the history of mankind, politics and governments have originated as a result of this desire of human beings for a social setup and this need of his to safeguard it from disorder. So these are the two basic statutes, you can say, which has led to the setup of a state. First, this need for human beings, they are gregarious beings, to live in a social setup. And second, because this collectivity, the way they would live, this could produce harmful results for them, then there has to be some sort of order, some sort of system that must be created. So prudence demands that instead of dreaming of a stateless society in this world, we should strive to purify the collective system as far as possible. Ustaz Javed Ahmed Ghamidi has also pointed out that divine scriptures, they tell us, they inform us that there are two areas which the Almighty has specified for His own self. The first of them is Palestine, and the other is the Arabian Peninsula. The reason that these places were specified was that nations which are selected by God to bear witness to religion at the global level could establish centers of Tawheed in these lands. So Palestine and Arabia, these were the two areas which were selected. And these centers were established in the form of a mosque, one in Mecca and one in Jerusalem. So the mosque in Jerusalem, of course, is called the Solomon's Temple, and the one in Mecca is called the Baytullah. So in order to protect these centers and to disseminate religion to all parts of the world through them, it was decided that the followers of other religions will never be able to permanently settle in these lands. So yes, they can have a temporary residence in these lands, but because they are to be made examples of monotheism and Tawheed, so just for these two territories, it was deemed essential that only Muslims should live here. The necessary outcome of this was that the formation of government in these lands should only consist of those nations which were chosen for this purpose, to be precise. So the Ishmaelites for Arabia and the Israelites for Palestine. So many a time the running of these governments remain in the hands of the Almighty, because in most cases it was the prophets being there and governing them. The last time that this happened was in the times of Prophet Muhammad and his messengerhood. And it was on this occasion when a political Sharia was revealed to the Quran for this government of God. So it was the divine government, some of whose aspects have been explained by the last messenger. So the guiding Sharia, which is called the political Sharia, is now derived from that particular Sharia or that particular setup which was in Arabia. And it was for the last time that a prophet of God was governing it, and in his times, of course, it was meant specifically for people who were living there as Muslims. So now the political Sharia is going to be derived from these statutes. So, according to Ustaz Javed Ahmed Ghamidi, this political Sharia can be understood on the basis of these 5 principles. So, these are the 5 statutes, the 5 points, the 5 pillars which tell us what the political Sharia is. The first is, of course, the basic principle, that what is the foundation on which this Sharia stands. The second is the real responsibility of a state. The third deals with its religious obligations. The fourth with the rights of Muslim citizens who live there. And the fifth is the system of government. What type of government is envisaged in such areas. So these are the 5 things which have been which are discussed as the political Sharia. These are the 5 statutes. These are the 5 pillars. These are the 5 regulations. Call them what you may, but it is on these 5 statutes and pillars that the whole edifice of the Sharia is based. Starting off with the very first statute, which is the basic principle. So you see, the basic principle is spelled out before you in the Quranic verse, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu atiyullaha wa atiyur rasul wa ulil amri minkum fa in tanaza'tum fi shay'in farudduhu ila Allahi wa rasul in kuntum tu'minuna billahi wal yawmil akhir zalika khayrun wa ahsanu ta'wila. Believers, obey God and the Prophet and those of you who are in authority. And if you disagree among yourselves in any matter, refer it to God and the Prophet if you believe in God and the last day. This is better and more seemly as regards the consequences. So this is basically the principle on which the foundation is you can say raised. The whole structure is raised on this foundation. The directive was given, of course, to the government of God, which was headed by Prophet Muhammad in those times and whose ruling team were actually chosen by him. But it is evident that the status of God and His messenger stated here is eternal. It just cannot be confined to their persons. So in all matters in which they have given an eternal directive, it is incumbent upon those in authority, whether they are the heads of the state or members of the parliament, to submit to them forever. The orders and directives of these rulers can only be carried out subsequent to obeying God and His Prophet, and only if they do not overrule or exceed the limits adjudicated by God and His Prophet. And Muslims, as a result, cannot enact any law in their country which is contrary to the Quran and Sunnah, or without taking into consideration the guidance which is provided by these 2 sources. Now, there are certain stipulations regarding obeying those in authority in subservience to God and the Prophet. So, as you can see, the verse says that you have to obey God and the Prophet and those in authority. But those in authority, which are the rulers, there are certain stipulations that we have to understand. So, their obedience is not absolute. So, as far as these directives or guidance that is provided by the Prophet is concerned, firstly, this guidance is that Muslims must fully cling to state authority in all circumstances. The Prophet has termed state authority as al-jamara. Al-jamara is an Arabic word, and a very synonymous word for this is a sultan. And he has directed that every Muslim must in no way dissociate himself from it. He has further said that if anyone does so, it is as if he has left Islam. And a Muslim who dies in this state, it is as if he died the death of Jahiliyyah, which is the period before the Quran in which matters were decided on the basis of tribal interests and not on the basis of truth. So the Prophet is reported to have said, you can see, I'm just going to read out the translation. He said that he who sees something despicable in his ruler should bear it. For he who even slightly dissociates himself from state authority and dies in this condition shall die the death of Jahiliyyah. So how important it is to adhere to state authority can be clearly seen. And then, of course, there is another directive also cited in Bukhari. It says that he who sees something despicable in his ruler should bear it. For he who even slightly dissociates himself from the obedience of the sovereign crown and dies in this condition shall die the death of Jahiliyyah. And you can see that 2 words are used in this narrative. One is al-jama'ah and the other is a sultan. And I just said earlier on that these 2 are used synonymously. They are used in the same way. So a sultan and al-jama'ah both refer to state authority. And Muslims have been called to remain associated with state authority, and they must not in any way dissociate themselves or be in a state of anarchy. The second corollary which the Prophet has derived from this is that Muslims have to be law-abiding citizens of their country. Whatever laws are enacted should be obeyed in letter and spirit by them, and in no way should they evade the law in any way. Any disagreement, personal dislike, communal support, or any sort of reservation should never lead them to breach the law, except if some law is enacted in disobedience to the Almighty. So you can see the Prophet is reported to have said, again I'm going to quote Imam Muslim, he has said that it is mandatory upon you to listen to and to obey your rulers, whether you are in difficulty or at ease, whether willingly or unwillingly, and even when you do not receive what is your right. Look at how important it is to obey the rulers. I mean, even if we are in difficulty, even if we don't like our rulers, even if they are people who are unjust, even then the state of obedience is much likable than creating anarchy and showing disobedience. And then at another instance it is said, whether he likes it or not, it is mandatory upon a Muslim to listen and to obey his rulers except when he is ordered to commit a sin. If he is ordered to do so, he should neither listen nor obey. And clearly this is a limit that has been told to us, that if we are asked to do something which is against religion, we should not follow that directive. And the directive of obeying those in authority obviously relates to Muslim rulers. So this is evident from the context of Surah Nisa when it is said, it says, Atiullah wa Atiur Rasul. So the Prophet has explained that if an attitude of rebelliousness is adopted with God and His Messenger, then this directive of showing obedience to the rulers no longer stands. So you see, you have to obey Muslim rulers, but if Muslim rulers themselves become rebellious against religion, then you are no longer required to follow them. So Ubadah bin Samit is reported to have said, and this is something that you can clearly see, that the Prophet called us to pledge allegiance to him, which we did. I mean, the Prophet himself. A narrator said, among the things on which we had been asked to pledge were the following: we shall listen and obey, whether willingly or unwillingly, whether we are in difficulty or at ease, and even when we do not receive what is our right, and that we shall not contest the authority of our rulers. He said, you can only contest their authority if you witness outright kufr, which is kufr bawah, as the Arabic term says, outright kufr in any matter from them in which you have a clear evidence from God. So this is what is essential, that unless there is this outright rejection of religion, we are required to follow them. And in these circumstances, no Muslim has been given the permission to revolt against the government unless he has the backing of a clear majority behind him. The reason for this is that if the majority does not support him, then such a revolt would not be against the government. On the contrary, it would be against other Muslims themselves, which according to the Shariah is what it is called fasad fil ard, spreading lawlessness or anarchy in the society, which is an offense actually, regarded by the Quran to be punishable by death. So the Prophet has said, when you are organized under the rule of a person and someone tries to break your collectivity apart or disrupt your government, kill him. So such is the issue, that if you rise against your government in this way, that it is organized in the form of a rule and someone rebels against it, then it is high treason and this is punishable by death. So we can clearly see, viewers, that as far as our religion is concerned, how important it lays this condition of showing obedience to the rulers. But it should also remain clear that if this revolt takes place in the form of an armed uprising, so before that we were talking about showing revolt in the form of a non-armed action, but if it takes place in the form of an armed uprising, then it should be subject to all the conditions of jihad imposed by the Shariah, which of course means that an independent government should be organized in some other place, and the person who leads the jihad should of course be in authority, in charge of that. So no Muslim is allowed to take up arms in rebellion against the government unless he fulfills these conditions. So you see, this is the basic principle on which the Islamic State is based, that you have to stick to state authority, and number two, you have to show obedience even if you do not like people who are at the helm of affairs, because after all they have been elected by a process. And as we shall see a little from now, that this elected process, or the way in which they are imposed, or the way in which they are installed as a government, is clearly on the basis of the opinions of the Muslims. So in this regard, if there is to be anything different, then it can only be when Muslims or Muslim rulers, they show outright rejection of kufr. And on one occasion, when the Prophet was asked that, as an example, he said that when they stop praying, so this would be, for example, one area in which they would become outright, they would be guilty of outright rejection, they would be guilty of rejecting religion outright. And therefore, we have to understand this. So this is so important, to obey state rule, the law of the land, and at the same time, the rule of law, and to respect the writ of law. Such is its importance. Now let us go on to the second statute, and this is the real responsibility of Islamic or a Muslim state. Now this real responsibility is spelled out in this Quranic verse, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُكُمْ أَن تُؤَدُّوا الْأَمَانَاتِ إِلَىٰ أَهْلِهَا وَإِذَا حَكَمْتُم بَيْنَ النَّاسِ أَن تَحْكُمُوا بِالْعَدْلِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ نِعِمَّ مَا يَعِظُكُم بِهِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ سَمِيعًا بَصِيرًا. Believers, God has decided to bestow political authority on you. So on this occasion, God commands you to hand over the trusts to their rightful owners, and when you judge between men, pass this judgment with fairness. Indeed, this is from God an excellent admonition. Indeed, God is He who hears and sees all things. So the Prophet on this very basis insisted that a person who selfishly desires public office should never be considered eligible for it, because he's asking for that public office. He's desirous of that public office. And if a person is desirous of public office, we cannot expect justice from such a person. So the Prophet is reported to have said, do not seek a public office. Don't be desirous of a public office. If it is granted to you because of your desire, you shall find yourself being handed over to it. And if it is granted to you because without your desire, you shall be helped. So if you're chosen for this task, it is perfectly okay. But if you in any way desire it and it is given to you, this would mean that you have some vested interest in it. And precisely for this reason, there is another important thing that we have to understand, that the Quran tells us that a person who in any way seeks public office is a person he's never going to be just to the country. And history bears witness that in order to establish justice, the rightly guided caliphs, they always kept their doors open for criticism and for petitions and appeals from the public. Not only this, they adopted the lifestyle of the destitute to the extent that they even wore patched up clothes and administered their realms with utmost simplicity and austerity. In short, the heavens and the earth bore witness that they lived among the masses, for the masses, on the same standard of living as the masses. They were like kings even in indigence, and princes even in poverty. So the important thing is this delivery of justice, this administration of justice. And justice is something, dear viewers, is just not confined to court justice. It encompasses social justice as well, which means providing equal opportunities to people, providing a setup which is based on merit, in which people are selected for their duties, for their jobs, in their professions, in their assigned duties on the basis of their ability, on the basis of their aptitude. And in short, it has to be a meritocracy. It has to be a system which is to be based on merit. Now let us move to the third statute of the political Sharia, or the third pillar, I can say. And this is actually, it relates to the religious obligations of a state. And these have been stated in the Quran in the following words, and this is Surah Hajj. It says, الَّذِينَ إِن مَّكَّنَّاهُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ أَقَامُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتَوُا الزَّكَاةَ وَأَمَرُوا بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَنَهَوْا عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ. So it says, these believers are those, if we grant them authority in this land, will be diligent in the prayer and pay zakah and enjoin what is virtuous and forbid what is evil. How important this is to understand that while obeying this directive of the Quran as per the Sunnah, which was constituted by the Prophet for establishing the first of these things. I mean, these are 4 things mentioned: the prayer, zakat, enjoining good, and forbidding evil. So regarding the first thing, the Sunnah, the practice of the Prophet, which was instituted at the government level, it said that firstly, Muslim rulers will show diligence in the prayer and also require of their governors and representatives to adhere to it. They cannot be slack in their prayers. Secondly, the address of the Friday and Eid prayers, as well as leading these prayers at all places, shall be the obligation of their rulers and their appointed representatives. How important this is to understand that when the rulers are going to lead the prayers, they have to be at a certain standard of character. And not only that, they are going to face the public every week. They are going to take the criticism. They are going to understand what their demands are. In this way, religion wants one day reserved for the rulers to come to the masses, to present themselves for accountability as well. The second thing which is mentioned, of course, is to adhere to zakat or to pay zakat. So regarding this, the Sunnah which is instituted in this regard is that this is the only tax which can be imposed on the Muslims. No other tax can be imposed without the will of the Muslims. Every Muslim citizen who is liable to zakat shall pay the stipulated amount from his wealth, produce and livestock to the government. The government in return, besides other expenditure, shall strive to fulfill the needs of its deprived citizens through this money, reaching out to them before they reach a state that they must come to the government to satisfy their basic needs. So this is an important thing, that zakah is the only tax which is imposed on the Muslim citizens, and the concept of zakat itself is an independent topic that we shall inshallah discuss when we will be discussing the economic Sharia, because the general concept of zakat is that it is a poor fund or a charity fund, which is absolutely incorrect as per the Quran. It is a fund or it is a tax given to the government so that it can run the affairs of the state and make it a welfare state. Now, as far as the third thing which is mentioned here is concerned, the enjoining of ma'ruf, which is to enjoin what good is, and forbidding the munkar, of course, these can be taken in tandem, both these things. The Quranic directive is that the government should constitute a group of people which should be entrusted with this responsibility. So it's not just, it's not just an obligation which has to be fulfilled summarily or in a very perfunctory way. It demands particular attention. It says that there should be a department that should be reserved for this. And the Quran has actually said this in Surah Al-Imran when it says, وَلْتَكُمْ مِنْكُمْ أُمَّةٌ يَدْعُونَ إِلَى الْخَيْرِ وَيَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. And from within you should a group be constituted, such that it should call towards what is virtuous, enjoin good, and forbid evil. And remember, only those who make these arrangements or who make arrangements for this will attain salvation. So it is obvious that in some cases this obligation of forbidding people from evil shall be discharged by educating them, by exhorting them, urging them, and in others, I'm afraid there could also be the use of the force of law. Now, for the first mode in which you are trying to enjoin people, trying to advise them, trying to educate them, those in authority have the Friday sermon available to them. So it's like a weekly class or a weekly lecture or a weekly instruction that is to be given to people in which they are enjoining good and making the righteousness and the goodness found in people prominent in them and inspiring them for this. And as far as using force is concerned, because at times you have to stop force by your own use of law, then for those in authority, they have the service of the police department, which is in a Muslim government, is established for this very purpose, and it works within the jurisdiction specified to achieve this objective. So enjoining good could be, of course, it has to be through the Friday sermon, and forbidding evil, this when it is done through mere sermonization, again the Friday pulpit is available. But when the use of force is to be employed, then the police department can do so. Okay, let's now move on to the fourth pillar of this Sharia, of the political Sharia. And this relates to the rights of Muslims. Now, in this regard, two Quranic verses very adjacent to one another must be read. So one of them is verse number 11, and the other is verse number 9, both belonging to Surah Tawbah. So the first of them says, فَإِن تَابُوا وَأَقَامُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتَوُا الزَّكَاةَ فَإِخْوَانُكُمْ فِي الدِّينِ وَنُفَصِّلُ الْآيَاتِ لِقَوْمٍ يَعْلَمُونَ. Which means, if they repent, are diligent in the prayer and pay zakat, they are your brethren in religion. And in this, although the translation is not mentioned here, but of course the later part of the verse says that in this way do we detail out the signs of God for those people who would like to know. And the second verse is, فَإِن تَابُوا وَأَقَامُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتَوُا الزَّكَاةَ فَخَلُّوا سَبِيلَهُم. So if they repent, are diligent in the prayer and pay zakat, leave them alone. Notice how closely worded these two verses are. Both start, فَإِن تَابُوا وَأَقَامُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتَوُا الزَّكَاةَ. So one of them says, فَخَلُّوا سَبِيلَهُم, which means that you leave them alone. And the other one says, فَإِخْوَانُكُمْ فِي الدِّينِ, that they are your brethren in religion. And these two verses of Surah Tawbah have the same context as a result. The Quran says that it should be proclaimed in the congregation of the Hajj that those among the idolaters of Arabia, now this is the Hajj of 9th Zul Hajj in the times of Prophet, who fulfill the conditions stated in these verses are the brethren of the believers. And the Almighty directs the believers to spare their lives. These conditions can be enumerated. Both these verses enumerate the same conditions. One, tabu, which means repenting from polytheism and disbelief and accepting Islam. Two, being diligent in the prayer as evidence of their faith. So this is something that you can also see. Being diligent in the prayer is something, and as evidence of their faith, they have to show this. And third is to pay zakat to the government to run its affairs. So these are the three conditions which are mentioned. Now, in this regard, what is important to be also understood is that while explaining this directive, Prophet Muhammad is reported to have said that this directive, this is something that we have to also understand, that as far as the payment of zakat is concerned, and as far as the discharging of the duty of the prayer is concerned, and giving up polytheism is concerned, these are things which are so clearly spelled out in the Quran that one can have no other opinion about that. And this directive, I just cited that it was given in Surah Tawbah and has the same context. It was actually for the idolaters of Arabia, to whom the truth had been communicated by the Prophet, that they were not left with an excuse to deny it. So this was for the idolaters of those times. Now, it is obvious that if such people were to be meted out the death punishment and were not required to fulfill anything beyond what is stated in this verse, it is all the more befitting that those after them who are not demanded, should not be demanded anything more. So this was the condition. These were the three conditions for people for whom death was destined, or death was ordained if they don't accept them. And if this is the condition, these are the conditions which were required for them. Automatically, people later on, people like us, anything beyond this cannot be required for them. So the basic principles which can be ascertained from these verses, these two verses, have also to be understood, and Ustaz Javed Ghamidi has explained these in his treatise, and he has said that first, people who fulfill these conditions, irrespective of their status in the hereafter, shall be considered as Muslims in the eyes of the law and the state, and they shall be entitled to all the rights which as Muslims they should have in their government. The second thing that he's pointed out is that after fulfilling these conditions, the mutual relationship between the rulers and the ruled shall be that of brotherhood. Brotherhood. They are like brothers. You remember the words are فَإِخْوَانُكُمْ فِي الدِّينِ. The Quranic words are, they are your brethren in religion, which means that they should possess the same legal rights. They cannot be discriminated. You just cannot do that. So the companions of the Prophet who are told that if these people fulfill these three conditions, they will be equal in status to the companions. Remember, no distinction will exist in the eyes of the law between the two regarding their legal rights. Such is the importance of that. The third thing which Ghamidi Sahib has pointed out in this regard is that due to this fraternal relationship, all responsibilities which reason and intellect endorse shall be imposed on the rulers and the ruled. And fourthly, irrespective of the duties and obligations imposed on a person as far as the accountability in the hereafter is concerned, the rulers of the Muslims can only legally ask them to fulfill three requirements mentioned in this verse. Nothing can be added or taken away from this list. So Muslim rulers have the authority to stop its citizens from committing a crime and to punish them if they do so, but positively they have no authority to require anything of the Muslims except the prayer and the zakat. They cannot demand from amongst the positive directives of religion anything more than the prayer and zakat. So they cannot force a Muslim to keep fasts, nor they can compel them to offer Hajj, even if it is known that he has the financial means to do so. Nor can they pass a law for compulsory military recruitment for the purpose of jihad. In short, as far as legislation against crimes is concerned, they have all the authority to do so, because that would be, of course, under fa'in tabu. But regarding positive requirements of the Sharia, except for the prayer and zakat, they can only urge Muslims to exhort, educate, indoctrinate to fulfill these things. Their jurisdiction just cannot go beyond this. So, just as common Muslims must observe this sacredness and sanctity, their rulers must also observe. And except for zakat, those rates which have been fixed by the Almighty through His messengers, their rulers can also, they don't have the authority to impose any other tax without their consent or forcibly extract even a penny or a handful of wheat from their wealth. Now let us turn to the last statute of this political Sharia, the last pillar. This is Amruhum Shura Bainahum. This is the 38th verse of Surah Shura, the 42nd Surah. Wa Amruhum Shura Bainahum, which means, and their system is based on their consultation. Yes, there's such a beautiful verse which tells us that the government shall be formed on the basis of the opinion of the Muslims. And if there is a difference of opinion amongst Muslims, then the opinion of the majority will be accepted. This is a corollary of the fact that the opinions of the Muslims has to prevail. So Amruhum Shura Bainahum means that the system of government which is envisaged by the Sharia is that of Shura in the Quranic terms, and it is very similar to what democracy of today is, in which people are elected on the basis of public opinion. And if there is no consensus regarding one person or one party, then of course the majority takes the helm of affairs, and that party survives or is eligible to survive at the helm of affairs as long as it enjoys the majority. As long as it enjoys the majority of the state, of the people. And such is the importance of this, that as far as entrusting a person in the collective affairs of the Muslim, then you have to realize that this choice has to be through free consent. There must not be coercion. And the confidence of the majority is the barometer. As long as this confidence is enjoyed, then they are in a position to rule. And as soon as they lose this confidence of the majority, they don't have the right to rule. And of course, the opinion has to be consulted in a way that their real opinion comes out. There is no coercion, which I just said. It has to be a decision made through in such a way that if there is any difference of opinion, the majority opinion has to take the final thing. So now, one more thing that I'd like to clarify is that before the Prophet died, he clarified on the basis of this very principle that the Quraysh would be his successors and not the Ansar. People think that he was actually appointing a Quraysh ruler or a Qurayshi ruler or a ruler belonging to the Qurayshite to be always, he should also always belong to the Quraysh tribe. This is not the case. Prophet in his own lifetime was actually, because there was no balloting, there was no very strong means to find out the opinion of people, he was telling Muslims and advising them that once he passes away, it is not the Ansar who hold sway regarding the whole of Arabia. Because you see, as far as the state was confined to Medina, the Ansar were the people who were in majority. But as soon as the whole of Arabia came under the Muslim sway, then the Muhajirun or the Quraysh were the people who held the majority opinion, who held the reins of the majority. So the Prophet in his own times, he has once said that Al-A'immatu min Quraysh, which means that the rulers shall belong to the Quraysh. The reason for that is that it was the Quraysh who held the majority opinion, who held the confidence of the majority. And as long as this confidence was there, they were to be given this status. And the Prophet has also stated the reason for this, and you will see that this is something which has been mentioned in a narrative of Imam Bukhari. It says that people in this matter follow the Quraysh. The believers of Arabia are the followers of their believers, and the disbelievers of Arabia are the followers of this disbeliever. So in other words, in order to avoid any untoward situation after he passes away and people start to contest that who is in majority, he gave this verdict just before he died that remember, when I pass away, the situation is such that the Quraysh hold the confidence of the majority. And how right he was, because we know right after his death, the Ansar did contest the authority of the Quraysh and in the famous Saqifa of Bani Saida, and they had to be reminded by Caliph Abu Bakr that remember what the Prophet had said, that the rulers will be from the Quraysh, not because it was a selection on the basis of the family of the Prophet, but because they were the ones who enjoyed the confidence of the majority. So dear viewers, these are the principles, these are the 5 principles on which this whole law is based. As far as these principles are concerned, we have to understand that they are derived from the Quran. This is an effort which has been made by Ustaz Javed Ahmed Ghamidi in his book Meezan, also known as Islam, a comprehensive introduction. And these rules, once again, just to enumerate them, the first of them, the first statute or the first pillar relates to the basic responsibility, or the basic principle. The basic principle, of course, which means that you have to adhere to the state authority, The second relates to the real responsibility, which is justice. Justice has to be meted out. The third relates to the religious obligations of a state, which of course are to enjoin good, to forbid evil, to establish the prayer, and to pay zakat. The fourth relates to the rights of Muslims, that they are equal citizens in the eyes of the law, and if they pay tax, and then they cannot be exacted anything beyond that. Similarly, the prayer, I had explained that the rulers have to be very, very observant of the prayer. They have to lead the Friday prayer as well. So these were some of the things which related to the rights. And finally, the fifth statute was about the basic about the principle of the system of government, which is shura, or which is exactly the same as democracy. So these are the 5 statutes or the principles which political Sharia is all about, as has been mentioned in Ustaz Ghamidi's treatise. With this, we come to an end to this session, and if you have any questions, please ask them now.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. I'll start off with a written question that asks, if the government is standing for or not inhibiting the promotion of something that is haram in Islam, for example, alcohol, can people denounce such government?
You see, when the government is saying something, then they will have to be, they will need to give some reason for that. It's not that, they are going to do so without any reason. So if this is an open violation, for example, they say that yes, Islam has asked us it has asked this prohibition of alcohol, but we shall not obey it. This is pure rebellion, and yes, it will be denounced. But for example, if they try to interpret it by telling us, well, alcohol is actually, it refers to a certain drink and it has to be of this sort and that sort, then of course you can still disagree with them. But in that case, they are not disobeying the directive, they are only trying to interpret it. So disobeying any clear directive which they themselves acknowledge and say that we'll not believe in it or we'll not follow it, this is what is called a rebellious attitude. But when they are trying to understand a particular directive and they come up with a different interpretation of that directive, which might not be agreeable to other people, then this cannot be termed as rebellion. It can only be termed as a difference of interpretation. And for that, of course, debate and dialogue is the right way.
So in that case, for example, in Emirates, you can buy alcohol wherever you'd like for the most part. And the government openly allows that despite being an Islamic government. So in that
So you
case,
see,
Mhm.
go on.
Oh no, please go ahead.
So you see, for example, if it allows, the alcohol, to the best of my knowledge, it is allowed only to non-Muslim citizens or people who live there as non-Muslim citizens. This is something very similar in Malaysia and some of the other countries as well. So basically, it is for people who are visiting, or they are tourists, or they are non-Muslims who do not, have the same values or principles. It does not allow Muslims to buy alcohol, to the best of my knowledge. And correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, I wouldn't happen to know that much, but I don't know if they're actually checking every time besides your age or not. So
Yeah.
our next question comes from Riaz. Please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Saab.
Wa alaikum salam.
Dr. Saab, according to Ghamidi Saab, he says, if I am correct, that anyone who says he is a Muslim, then he is a Muslim. So, but if
Yes.
on the other hand, there is a contrast, according to Ulul Amr, that we have to obey the Muslim rulers. How we define, on one hand, we are saying that anyone he says Muslim, he is a Muslim. And then, but on the other hand, there is a contrast between the Muslim rulers. They might not be, they might be saying.
You see, when a person is saying he's a Muslim and he's not outrightly rejecting any statute of Islam, we cannot deny him this Muslim status. Of people who say that they are following all directives, this is in exact conformity with what has been said earlier, that if they regard themselves to be Muslims, we can differ with them. We can say that the way you are interpreting a certain directive is not correct, but we have no authority to call them as non-Muslims. That is a different debate and discussion. And as far as this discussion is concerned, that a ruler says that yes, the prayer is a part of religion, but I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to follow it. This is rebellion. This is like saying that I accept that prayer or the fast has been prescribed, but I openly violate it. So it is this that the Quran says that if this is the case, then such rulers should not be. Then you have a right to disobey them, and there are certain other conditions.
So if the ruler doesn't pray, for example, then that means you can defy them.
Yes, if does not pray could be, it has to be qualified. Is it that he is not praying because of some interpretation, or is it that he is defying this matter and saying that yes, prayer is a directive of God and I'm not going to do it. I cannot do it. He could be careless in doing it, or he could be in open denial. Then yes, such people cannot be obeyed. Unless of course there is, as I said, the question of interpretation, because there are so many people who interpret the prayer a little differently. So there are, for example, Quranists who say that, well, the prayer is not what you do through these 5 prayers that you offer in certain postures, but the prayer which the Quran tells us is like remembering God even while walking or while doing certain other chores. So what he's doing is he's not denying the prayer. He's just giving you his own interpretation. So in that case, we will differ with his interpretation, and we might not choose him again as a ruler. But if a ruler says that, well, I accept that namaz or the prayer is part of religion, but I would not like to follow it for any reason. It could be arrogance or it could be carelessness. Then in such a case, that would be something that would disqualify him.
But on the other hand, we still say, for example, Ghamidi Saab says the prayer means, we have to take it as a maruf,
Right.
understanding. So if the Quranist is saying the Salah is not, I believe in it. So he's not.
So you see, what he's saying, he's not denying Salah. So you see, what makes a ruler eligible to not obey is his denial of Islamic directives. So he's not saying that Salah is not a directive of religion. What he's saying is that Salah means this. So this is like now a discussion that has to be, that has to be initiated with that person. And of course, if you don't agree with him, then you have all the right not to elect him again. But that would not make him a person who stands outside these folds.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Up next, we have Shabnam. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Maria. Sir, I have two questions. Should I put them together or one by one? Small questions.
I think one by one is better.
Okay, sir. Sir, while explaining the second pillar, political Shariah, you mentioned a hadith in which the Prophet, peace be upon him, said that do not present or desire yourself for a position of responsibility. Sir,
Right.
Sir, how is it practical in the present times, and is there anywhere where the system is near to this directive?
Well, actually, this means that you have a desire for a certain office. I mean, desire here doesn't mean that you feel that you're responsible and you're presenting yourself as a responsible person. That is a different case. I mean, I can present myself because I think that as a responsibility, this is something which I can administer. So that is another case. Desire actually means that you are not looking at your own aptitude or your ability. You just want to have that thing by hook or by crook or by some way. So you are desirous of getting to that job or to that post without even thinking that you are eligible for it or not. But if you yourself think that this is a responsibility that you can take, and at times there are times in which you have to present yourself or maybe nominate yourself and say, well, I can do my share. So that's another thing. So this is not being discussed by the Prophet. The Prophet is purely saying that when a person is desirous of something without having that aptitude or ability, and all that he wants is to just somehow grab that position, and he has that, some ulterior motive, and it's not actually something which stands up to his own ability. On such occasions, the Prophet has said, then you cannot expect such a person to be just, because now he's not going to do justice to that position. He is going to be, using that position for his personal gains.
Sir, it is then very difficult to differentiate for common people.
You see, we are given this guideline. So you see, if you have this guideline, you can clearly know about your own self, whether I am coveting a position, whether I have that greed to take up that job, I'm trying to grab it, or whether if I'm presenting myself, it is not because of any greed, but because I think that amongst people, if I have been asked, you see, it's not that you normally present your own selves. On many occasions, it is outside you, other people who ask that, well, is there a person who would like to nominate yourself for a certain thing? You said, yes, I think I have the ability. So that is perfectly okay. Because in that case, you are deciding on the basis of the aptitude that you have, not the greed or the desire that you have for it.
Right, sir. Thank you, sir. Sir, may I ask the second question as well?
Yes, please go ahead.
Sir, in the last principle of political Shariah, Amruhum Shura Bainahum, sir, we see that there have been prophets have been kings as well. Maybe that was because Allah was directly guiding them. But sir, to my understanding, Allah has not clearly forbidden kingdomhood, like they're still in holy city of Kaaba and otherwise as well. There were so many kings. Was there any clear prohibition of it?
Absolutely. This verse is the clearest prohibition. It says that a government cannot be nominated. It has to be elected. It has to be based on the opinion of the people. It cannot be a monarchy. It cannot be a dictatorship. It cannot be a kingdom in which a king has absolute powers. He himself is also subject to the power of the majority. He cannot have an autocratic status. He must also, not only he has to be elected by majority, but he has to rule by majority as well, because Amruhum Shura Bainahum necessitates that. So the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the way it has progressed there, it's just a recent thing in the last couple of centuries, but if you look at how people were ever since the time of the Prophet, in the time of the first four caliphs, which is the rightly guided caliphate or the Khulafai Rashidun, all of them were elected on this basis of majority. It was after Amir Muawiyah when this thing happened that monarchy stepped in. And instead of rulers getting elected, they started to be selected or nominated. For example, a father would nominate his son or nephew or so on and so forth. And ever since Muawiyah radiyallahu anhu, this change occurred, and then we had various dynasties. We had the Umayyads, we had the Abbasids, we had the Ottomans, we had the Fatimids, we had the Ubayyads, we had the Idrisids, all of these. And they became kingdoms, they became rulers by dynasty. And unfortunately, this is something which is absolutely against the provisions of Islam, which stresses that except for prophets of God, because they are divinely guided, for human beings, the government has to be installed on the basis of a majority opinion. As long as it enjoys that majority opinion, it is legitimate. And during the time that it remains legitimate and in power, even during that time, it must follow the authority or the rule of the majority if there is a difference of opinion regarding legislation in the parliament. So the majority has to be respected. So the Saudi Arabian model is not the model which has been prescribed by the Quran. In fact, I can tell you that there are three models currently. One of them is the Saudi model, which is what we call the dynastic model. The other is the Irani model, which is based on theocracy, which means only scholars have the right to rule. Our religion, the Quran is also against this. It has not said that only scholars have the right to rule. It has clearly said that people who are in majority have the right to rule. And thirdly, we have, and this also exists in Afghanistan. So Iran and Afghanistan are examples of theocratic states in which scholars are ruling. And it's not that the common man has been given this authority. And then there is a third model which is called secularism, which means that state has nothing to do with religion. So these are the three prevalent models. And the fourth one, of course, because I was already describing that, is that of democracy, which means that people have to be elected. That is the model which religion stands for. And democracy has evolved in the last 7 or 8 centuries. And we are now, after so many processes, we are in a position to say that we have somewhat come very near to the spirit of democracy in some countries. But it is 15 centuries or 14 centuries ago that Islam envisaged the fact that no, people cannot be oppressed. People cannot be ruled by autocratic rulers. They cannot be ruled by just religious scholars. They must be responsible for their own rulers by electing them. It is through their opinion. And in this way, you see, religion has empowered the common man, it is a highly, it's a concept which is so fulfilling to note, to understand, that as a common man, the Almighty has empowered every person that every person has to choose his ruler.
Thank you very much, sir. Very well explained. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. Our next question asks, will a family or office similar to state in a small scale would these laws still be applied to that?
Certainly not. That's not the case. And for a family, we have already a different Shariah or a different ruling given by the Quran, and that is this small family is basically it is constituted by a husband and wife. And a husband has been given the status of the head of the family, and he has the final authority, so to speak, but this doesn't mean that he's just going to run through the wife and just impose his opinion always. The way Islam wants things to happen is that the husband and wife to settle things on merit. But if there is a deadlock, because deadlock can always be there, there is not a question of right and wrong. The thing is, the wife could be right, the husband could be equally right, but then one thing has to be adopted when there is a deadlock. So in such a case, the Quran says, in the case of a family, the casting vote or the final say would be with the husband. So in that area, amruhum shura bainahum is not the principle, is not the final or deciding principle. The principle is, yes, the husband and wife shall consult and try their best to come to a conclusion on the basis of merit. But if there is a deadlock, then the opinion of the husband has to prevail. And that too, why? The Quran has said that because he is responsible for the financial situation of the family, and because he has been given this responsibility as a person, as a genre of human beings who are more suitable for this job. So the Quran has given this right to be the head of the family because of these two reasons, and one of them is that he is responsible for the financial rights of the family. I mean, to earn for the family. Whereas a wife can earn, she has all the authority to earn, but she is not liable to earn.
So then the same would apply for an educational institute as well, right? These
yes,
rules
absolutely.
would not be applied.
I mean, you see, in this case, if you're talking about an educational institution, then, for example, if you have to, you have a principal. The principal is of course, to be governed by a syndicate or a body above the principal. So that body is something which also must be governed in this way, in a democratic way. I mean, that too should not be autocratic. That should also be based on the principle of consultation. So in other words, what I'm saying is that except for the family, in which we already have a ruling, other forms of collectivities, like the example of a school that you gave, which has a board of governors or a syndicate. Similarly, there could be an organization which has a board of governors or a board of trustees, and they decide their matter through their majority. So for them, the prescription also is the same, that they should do so. But then there are institutions which are based on sole proprietorship maybe, or sole ownership, in which there are no consultees. You are just a person who is going to run that. That is equally good. But if you have a group of people governing, then that group of people should base their decision on the decision of the majority. And that is what generally happens as well.
Even if the majority is saying that you cannot impose prayers, for example, in school.
Well, you see, again in that case, that you have to understand that there are certain foundations on which a law is based. There are certain foundational principles on which you can say that they cannot be challenged. So you see, what happens is that a group of people, when they form a school maybe, or anything which is a collective effort, then there are certain foundations on which they would lay their principles. And if these foundations are that they will not force people to pray. This is something that the matter should be left to the person's own personal guidance or his own urge. That is perfectly okay. But what they cannot do or should not do is start prohibiting people from praying. I mean, if that is what they do, then they are stepping outside their authority. But if they are giving the choice to people, then that is perfectly okay. So stopping people is something that is going beyond your own jurisdiction.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. Very related to that is another question that asks, in the ayah, the word jama'at has been referred to government, whereas in Islamic Educational Institute, they refer to a specific sect of religion that they belong to. Are they right in using this word to refer?
That is, that it depends on the usage. In early Arabic, in ancient Arabic, the word al-jama' is synonymous with the state. It does not mean the Jama as the word party would be understood. So for that, there are other words. But modern Arabic could use this word, but for a party. But then this would be a modern usage. In the terminology of ancient Arabic, or classical Arabic, I would say, not ancient Arabic. In the classical Arabic of the Prophet's times, the word al-Jama was never used for a party. It was always used for the state. And that is why you can clearly see how as-Sultan and al-Jama are used synonymously. So as-Sultan is the state, and similarly al-Jama is the state. So the word al-Jama in classical Arabic always refers to state authority and not to a party, so to speak, because the word, as you can know, the Urdu meaning of the word Jama, and at times the modern usage of the word Jama in Arabic, might point you to the fact that a party is being referred to. This is not the case with the classical Arabic of the Quran and Hadith.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. Riyaz, please go ahead.
Dr. Saab, the question is about the prayers. In a Muslim state, can the rulers, they can force the masses to pray?
Well, they should tell them that if they don't pray, then they will not be given the rights of Muslims. In other words, the legal definition of a Muslim is that he is a person who is praying and he is paying zakat. If he publicly does not do this, or he says that this is not my responsibility, I'm not going to do them, follow these two directives, then a ruler can deprive him of the rights of a Muslim.
But they can't force it.
Of course they cannot force it. I mean, by force, if you mean that, I mean, you call them to go and pray in the mosque, they cannot do that. But if a person says that I am not going to pray, and somehow it comes to the notice of the government that a person has persistently taken up the stance that I'm not going to pray, then he can be stripped of his rights of being a Muslim.
And then they can take away some of the, benefits they are giving being
Yes,
as a Muslim.
yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. We have another long question in Urdu, so I'm going to attempt my best to read it. उस्ताद जी ये फरमाते हैं कि अनबिया को की जाने वाली वही के एक सूरत ख्वाब भी है और जब ख्वाब आता है तो वो महल ताबीर होता है मगर इस ज़मन में हम सिर्फ सैयदना यूसुफ अलैहिस्सलाम को भी देखते हैं देखते हैं कि वो दूसरों को ख्वाब की ताबीर करते थे अगरचे उन्होंने अपनी जाती ख्वाब 11 सितारों चांद सूरज का सजदा करना की ताबीर नहीं की थी सैयदना इब्राहिम अलैहिस्सलाम ने भी बेटा कुर्बान करने ख्वाब में देखा तो वो उस्ताद कहते ताबीरी शक्ल में ही था कि बेटे को बैतुल्लाह के सरपरस्तों ज़िम्मे लिखना था मगर सैयदना इब्राहिम ने मनोआन का जाकर शरा
I understand. I mean, all these things, what they are implying. I mean, what is the question?
The question,
maybe the last line would be the question.
अब इसकी ताबीरी तफसील उस्ताद जी पेश करते हैं सवाल मेरा ये है कि अनबिया ने ताबीर क्यों नहीं की?
This can only be asked from the Anbiya if they didn't do it. I mean, you see, the question, I think what the person is asking is that all these dreams, they are symbolic in nature. And so when there is a symbolism in a dream, then it should not be taken to be literal. And it should always be interpreted in the form of a symbol. So clearly, as the questioner has asked, that the dream which was seen by Joseph or Prophet Yusuf, in which 11 stars and the sun and the moon were prostrating before Joseph himself, it didn't have a literal meaning. I mean, literally the stars were not going to prostrate. So the interpretation of the dream was that his father and mother and his 11 brothers would be subservient to him. So this was like a symbolism being shown to him that the sun and the moon and the stars are prostrating before him. So yes, dreams, they are all, generally they are in the form of symbolism, and symbolism has to be always interpreted and not to be taken literally. Now, in the case of Abraham, the Quran has said, "Qad saddaqta ru'ya." I mean, Abraham himself, when he saw this dream that he's going to slaughter his son, he could have interpreted it. I mean, he could have. Of course, he was a prophet of God. He could have easily seen that there is a symbolism involved in it, which means that you have to dedicate your son to the service of Baitullah, which actually is the symbolism here. And he could have done it literally. And the Quran says, "Inna haza lahuwal bala'ul mubin," that this was a huge or clear test for Abraham. What should he do? Of course, he was not required to slaughter his son. What he was required to do was to dedicate his son, because the symbolism of slaughtering your son is like dedicating him, making him go away and do the work of God. So it was like making him specific to the work of God. So Abraham did not interpret it literally. He did not take it in the form of a symbol. He took it in the form of a literal directive being given to him. And this is something that any one of us can do. I mean, any person who's given these two choices, he can end up doing either. My understanding is that Abraham, being a prophet of God, he thought that he was facing a huge trial, and interpreting a dream would have been a lesser outcome or alternative. So he took the more harsher aspect of that, or the more difficult of that. And that is why the Almighty stopped him. I mean, He never allowed the slaughter to take place, because the Almighty said that, well, this was not required from you. However, because of this huge passion that you had, that you would not go for the easier option but for the difficult option, now to commemorate this huge passion and this huge thing that you had in your mind, it now has been instituted as a yearly festival of animal sacrifice. I think this is what has happened in the case of Abraham.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Akram and Bhatti, please go ahead.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम सर।
वालेकुम अस्सलाम।
सर जैसे कई कंट्रीज में मुस्लिम कंट्रीज में मार्शल लॉ लग जाता है या कोई और the government who's up, people who are up there, they're not elected, they just, so to speak, they're selected, they're not elected by the people. Then
Right.
how would the citizen behave? And they are not seen.
Right. So I understand. Basically, the government would be regarded as an illegitimate government because it has seized power. It is illegitimate. But because now it has come to power, the prescription of the Sharia or the guidance provided is that you have to obey them, unless other things which we have mentioned, they come into play. So yes, the government is illegitimate, and I mean, it's like a dictatorship, and it is a military dictatorship to be precise, and this is illegitimate. But because it has come into being, in order to maintain law and order and not create anarchy, we are required to submit to it.
Okay, we still have to submit to it and don't
Right.
rebel against it. And even if they are not seen openly saying prayer except Eid namaz and stuff, they still have to.
So you see, that is another thing. I mean, if they are violating the Sharia in any way or rebelling against it, and if that comes to public notice, then of course that is a different thing. I mean, if you don't see them praying, there could be 101 reasons for that. Maybe they go and pray at home. Maybe they combine their prayers on one occasion. So you see, this is one thing, and to be a person who continuously neglects the prayer or has an opinion that, well, there's no need for me to pray, even though you think that it's a directive of the Sharia. So you see, these are things that have to be understood. I mean, you need to be more careful that any decision or any verdict that you have in this regard, or any opinion that you form, must be based on a lot of data.
Okay, sir. Thank you, Jazakallah.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. For the last question, there is a third part which I missed. So basically, it's saying that Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, in his dream, he saw Dajjal. मगर उसकी ताबीर के बगैर रसूलुल्लाह ने ज़ाहिरी नक्शे बयान फरमा दिया. So that's why they're asking why did he do that, and how is Ghamidi Sahab able to explain interpret what Dajjal looked like?
So I am not aware of his interpretation of this particular narrative, because it is of course a narrative that needs to be interpreted because it is based on a dream. But the fact is that if the Prophet is going to describe any of his dreams, and if you read Hadith literature, there are several other dreams which he has described, and they'll come to our notice. And at times when people have asked him that what exactly is the interpretation of this dream, he would give it at times, and at times he would not, and at times he would give it and people would not report it. So regarding this dream that the questioner has asked, that he saw the Dajjal and the Prophet Jesus circumambulating the Kaaba, which is found in the Muwatta of Imam Malik, I mean, this is a dream which has been narrated in Hadith books without its interpretation coming from the Prophet himself. So this is something which people who are of knowledge and wisdom should interpret it. Unfortunately, I am not aware of the interpretation of this particular dream.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. That was it for all of the questions today.